Friends, there was a great man in Jewish history. His name was Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi. He was one of the greatest Jewish leaders of all time. His deeds and his teachings impacted the world and shaped Jewish life long after his lifetime. They used to call him Rebbe. He lived in about a century after the destruction of the Second Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And this man embodied all the qualities you can want in a leader. This man, Rebbe, was a tremendous Torah scholar. He was the compiler of the Mishnah, the cornerstone of the oral law. He actually had a very distinguished lineage. He was a member of the tribe of Judah, the line of King David. He was a descendant of Rabbi Gamliel, the leader of the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, who their family provided leadership to the Jewish people over the course of many generations. This man, Rebbe, was a very highly esteemed, not only by the Jews of his times, but by the Gentile and the government officials. He was actually a very close friend of the Roman Emperor Antoninus. He also possessed a tremendous personal wealth, to the extent that the Talmud in Baba Metzia says that the stableman of the house of Rebbe was wealthier than the king of Shapur of Persia due to his abundant livestock. Our sages summed it up in the Talmud Gittin that said, from the days of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, until the days of Rav Ashi, a great scholar, we didn't find any Torah and greatness that were in one place. That is, from the time the Torah was given at Mount Sinai until the days of the end of the Talmudic era, there was never a person who at the same time was the greatest spiritual figure of his generation, as well as the most distinguished in material wealth, except for Moses, and Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi. And in this capacity, Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi, or called Rebbe, he served as a crucial anchor and a beacon of hope for the Jewish people during those very difficult years following the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple. So understandably, when the Rebbe took ill at the end of his life, it was a very painful time. The Talmud in Ksubot shares that the sages of that time declared a public fast, and the Jews tore the heavens with prayer, say, God, have mercy and preserve their leader and shining light. So severe was that situation that the sages of the time decreed, whoever says that Rebbe has died will be stabbed with a sword. The rabbis were actually concerned that someone might prematurely announce Rebbe's death, and therefore what would happen? They would dampen the hopes of the people and extinguish their fervor of their prayers and supplications. And as long as the people's cries reached the heavens, the angel of death could do nothing about it, and the Rebbe remained alive. Yet, seeing how weak Rebbe was, and how he was suffering, and he was struggling to put on his prayer shawl and his tefillin, his assistant, his maidservant, said, I got to do something about this. Rebbe can't suffer no more. So she went up to the roof, she took an earthenware vessel, and she threw it to the ground, and it shattered. And the noise caused a momentary pause in the prayers of all of his disciples. And in that moment, the angel of death saw there's no prayer, and he took the soul of Rebbe, and Rebbe passed away, he departed. The sages, they sent one of their colleagues, who's named Bar Kapara, to Rebbe's house. Check out the situation. They didn't know what's going on. When he came back, he reported cryptically, he said, the angels have triumphed over the righteous, and the sacred ark was captured. Fearing the worst, when they heard that, did they say, did he die? And Bar Kapara said, you said it, I didn't say it. Because after all, it had been decreed that no one should say that a Rebbe had died. Now this story really behooves an explanation. Number one is, why did the sages issue such a strong proclamation saying, whoever says Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi, Rebbe died, will be stabbed with a sword? I mean, surely, like all mortals, Rebbe was destined to eventually pass away. What then is gained by being in denial? Secondly, why was such a cryptic dance necessary of Bar Kapara talking about when he wanted to say that Rebbe passed away? He spoke about a cosmic battle between the angels above and the righteous below, and the holy ark went above, and making sure to remind the other sages that they were the ones to announce that Rebbe died. He said, I didn't say it, you said it. I mean, what would have been so bad if he simply would have allowed to say the hard truth? Rebbe unfortunately passed on. And finally, if there's something inherently wrong with talking about the death of the Rebbe, why only to this holy man? Why did this not apply to other holy sages in Jewish history? So I'd like to share an answer with you based on the writings of a famous sage. His name was Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz, who lived in the early 1700s, early to mid 1700s. He was the rabbi of Prague, chief rabbi. And his explanation actually dovetails beautifully with a number of the Rebbe's teachings on the topic of about the passing of a tzaddik. And it's actually a message that's very relevant this week as we commemorate this Tuesday, 30 years since Gimel Tammuz, the physical passing of the Rebbe. And he says like this: when the sages forbade talking about Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi in terms of death, they were actually making a very fundamental point. Watching Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi breathe his last, and his body lowered to the ground, one might reasonably conclude, you know what? His spirit will now gradually disappear, because, from life as we know it. I mean, if one buries one body, you also, maybe you're burying his presence. And you know what happens? To the physical eye, it seems as, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rebbe, is now part of the past. So to this notion, Bar Kapara said, you said he died, I didn't. Because Bar Kapara was reminding them that whatever natural meaning of death is, it doesn't really apply to the same extent to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. To be sure, Bar Kapara understood very well that Rebbe's soul ascended to a higher plane, which is why they actually did the laws of mourning. They rent his garment as a sign of grief. But he also understood that the Rebbe's physical absence in no way interfered with the fact that his soul remained connected down here, continuing to be a part of the lives of all of his people, all of the students, continuing to help them, to be there for them. You see, the passing of a tzaddik poses a challenge for the physical eye. But as Jews, we are professionals at straddling two worlds simultaneously, merging the spiritual and the physical together as one. Because a Jew can, and a Jew must understand that a passing of a tzaddik is not the end of the story, and therefore you can't say, Rebbe died, God forbid. This actually has precedence in the Torah itself, including our forefather Jacob and Moses. Take a look at the book of Genesis, where it described Jacob's passing. You know what the Torah uses? It doesn't say Yaakov died, as it would say ordinarily by someone else. It actually says Vayigva, and he expired, and he was brought to his people. What does that mean, he expired? So the Talmud says, Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Yaakov Avinu did not die. Ma zarai b'chayim afu b'chayim. Just as his seed alive, so too is he alive. Regarding Moses, what does it say? It says, and he died there. And the sages observe about another verse. When Moses was at Mount Sinai, it says, and he, Moses, was there with God in heaven for 40 days and 40 nights. And the Talmud says, just as he was standing and serving, so too he was standing and serving even after his physical departure from the world. Moses continues to stand and serve. So clearly there's a unique common thread that runs through these three great leaders, Moses, Jacob, and Rebbe, emphasizing that they were the sort of leaders who didn't die, but they remained connected to their followers down here. So you may ask, what were these leaders? Who were they? What was so special of them that they all stood for? What was their common denominator? A hint appears in the fact Rabbi Yehuda wasn't just called Rabbi Yehuda, he was called HaNasi, the leader, the president. Different leaders had title. I mean, Abraham, what do we call him in Hebrew? Avram Avinu, which means Abraham, our father. Moses is actually called Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. David was called King David, David HaMelech. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he was defined by the fact that he was a Nasi. Not just anyone, he was a Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda was part of the chain of many Nasiim leaders, all the way back to Hillel the elder. And this was a famous line of families of leaders. Now the reason, of course, is because more than anyone else, Rabbi Yehuda got this title and it stuck to him till today. He's called Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi because he embodied the qualities of a Nasi. What does it mean? someone who dedicates his life to the welfare of every human being in his generation. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi, he wasn't someone that just sat in his office all day, secluded in Torah study, and maybe perhaps nodding his head in agreement if someone came to seek his blessing. Rather, you know what he did? He proactively led the people. He assessed their needs from top down, from top to bottom. He stood behind them to raise them, to establish them as an uplifted, proud people, even from the depths of the exile. And this level of commitment and capacity affected lasting and universal change, both in his Torah teaching and also in the effort to improve the material status of his people. And by the way, in teaching Torah, Rebbe was the one who stepped up to the plate, and he did something for the first time in history. He transcribed the teachings of the oral law. What do I mean? Moses gave the written law. 1,500 years before at Mount Sinai, Moses gave the Torah, the written law. But the oral law was passed down from teacher to student to student. They never ever wrote down the oral law. It was passed down generations, 1,500 years. No one ever was allowed to write it. And every generation passed it on to the next from spoken word. It was never books. And that's how they kept the teachings of the Torah sacred, of the oral law, and making sure that it wouldn't fall into the hands of the unworthy who would misinterpret and abuse them. Yet, Rabbi observed now that the Jewish people were going into an exile. And he realized that they're going to be dispersed around the world. So what did he do? He took it upon himself to fulfill a biblical verse that says, Eis Lasei Lashem, which means it's a time to work for Hashem as they have made void your Torah. What does it mean? In certain circumstances, some biblical precepts must be negated. What does it mean? When they're making void your Torah in order to act for Hashem, meaning to say, he knew that if the oral Torah was not going to be recorded, he knew there might be nothing left, God forbid, to preserve, to go on as the Jews were being dispersed. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he embarked on such an enormous task of compiling 1,500 years of oral law. He wrote the Mishnah. He put it in the books of the Mishnah so that every Jew and every person in future generations would have this information needed to abide by the Torah teachings and live a holy life. And because of this, Rabbi, a Jew in 2024, 2,000 years later, almost 2,000, who's busy at work or is busy in the world, could take out the Mishnah today and immerse himself in these holy works. So Rebbe's work on behalf of the people's physical well-being was also no less wide-ranging. What does it mean? He not only ensured the oral law should be written, he had government connections, and he was very connected with the Gentiles and the leaders of that time, and he helped Jews in ways that were unimaginable to uplift him. And therefore you can't say that Rebbe died, because today, almost 2 millennia after Rebbe's generation, millions of Jews and millions of people are empowered and elevated and educated. By who? By Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And just like Jacob, and just like Moses before him, this man's very identity, putting his own essence out of the picture, he lowered himself to devote to the needs of his people. So therefore, even when his soul ascended to a higher world, he didn't leave his people to languish in the languish and the sorrow of exile. Quite to the contrary. He remained with them. He's guiding them. He's bringing salvation to their lives. And when someone's entire life is lived for the people of his generation, his people remain his sole concern. Before his birth, during his mission and life in this earthbound world, and certainly after shrugging off his mortal coils and when he descends above. Another connection, by the way, between Moses and Jacob and Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is to the degree to which they embodied the Torah. Because among the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it was actually Jacob who represented the Amud HaTorah, the pillar of Torah. And for their part, both Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Jacob and Rebbe represent passing the Torah from one generation to the next. And that's why they are known both as our teacher. Moshe, universally called Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, our teacher. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi means Rabbi, my teacher, my master. So just as Moshe transcribed the written Torah, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rebbe, transcribes the underpinnings of the oral law, which we have today. And this is another reason that these three leaders are biblically not subject to the natural order of death. Because when someone's very essence is the Torah, inherently eternal, everlasting, and transcendent is his soul. By definition, this is like an eternal, everlasting, transcending the natural limitations of human life. Friends, this week we're about to mark 30 years since Gimel Tammuz, the passing of our Rebbe, of our generation. Because everything we just said about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi applies to our Rebbe as well. The Nasi of our generation, the leader of our generation. Because the Rebbe was the ultimate Nasi. He was completely devoted to you and I, wherever a Jew can be found in the world, or anyone else that wanted to connect. The Rebbe could find no rest until he knew that everyone, even in the most remote corners of the earth, was made aware of their soul, of their Jewishness, and their importance and greatness of their heritage. The Rebbe was the consummate Rebbe, or the consummate teacher. Such a profound, enormous, direct impact on worldwide Jewry. Through his insightful Torah teachings, delivered in his talks and his Hasidic discourses. You can find it all today online. Thousands upon thousands of hours of insight on how to build this world, to make this a godly place. The Rebbe had mitzvah campaigns to engage us all. And he established close to 6,000 couples today, shluchim around the world, to be sparks of light, lighthouses to infuse and make this world a godly place. And the Rebbe dedicated his entire life to the worldwide Jewry. And he, God forbid, has not abandoned the ship 30 years ago in some sort of a storm and left us in exile. Because even to think such a word is a smack of heresy. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu and Jacob and Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the Rebbe continues to stand, he continues to serve, and the Rebbe is with us, he guides us. And God willing, he'll guide us soon towards the final redemption. Friends, we've discussed the eternal life of the great tzaddikim of these Jewish people, which continues to influence their followers below. But the truth is that it goes both ways. Just as his seed is alive, he too is alive. What does that mean? When we see the Rebbe's students, the continuation of the Rebbe, we continue doing what he wanted. He actually, even though it's 30 years later, is living on through us. There's no greater sign that the Rebbe is alive. Think of it this way. 30 years passed since that bitter day. On paper, you know what the world predicted? Gimel Tammuz, the day of his passing, thought, you know what? Chabad, wonderful organization, wonderful movement. Many eulogized the Rebbe. They spoke about his great influence on Jewish life and on the world. They thought, you know what, this is the end of it. The Rebbe, yet you know and I know the Rebbe's work only increased. The Rebbe's work intensified, and it continues doing so till today. It's not because we're so smart, we're so talented. But you know what? It's only because when we continue in his ways, he too is alive and continues to stand at our head. Friends, if in 1994, 30 years ago, there were about 1,200 couples shluchim around the world, today, there are more than 5,000, almost 6,000 couples around the world. Shluchim. This couldn't happen by natural means. This is a sign simply at the Rebbe's presence and proof that he continues to stand and serve through us, through I, and through you, and he empowers you to continue that mission. In a similar vein, the Rebbe explains another verse. It actually says in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, that before Yaakov passed away, he said to Joseph, bring me your 2 sons to be blessed. And Yaakov said, and now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, they are mine. Your sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are mine, just like Reuven and Shimon are mine. Why? He said Ephraim and Manasseh were the grandsons, while Reuven and Shimon were the sons. You should have been the grandsons. Why should the grandsons belong to Yaakov the same way as his own sons do? He said the grandsons are mine, just like my sons are mine. And the Rebbe explains in Likutei Sichos, volume 15, that the fact that these 2 Jewish children grew up alone in a very dark spiritual land of evil in the land of Egypt, and nevertheless grew up as righteous, as holy as Yaakov's sons Reuven and Shimon, that shows their mind. The question is, how did they grow up to be so righteous in such a place like Egypt? It's because they remained true to Yaakov. Even when Yaakov passed away, they lived on through him. Yaakov lived on through them. And Rashi actually says the famous quote, as I quoted a few minutes ago, just as his seed, his children are alive, he too is alive. So when we stay connected to the Rebbe, through his teachings and continue his mission and his vision, the Rebbe lives on through you, through I. The Rebbe's light touches every one of us, every Jew in the far-flung corners of the universe. And as a shliach of the Rebbe, all the work that we do, with everything, the power and the inspiration comes from the one who sent us, the Rebbe. I remember a story of a friend of mine, Rabbi Shem Tov of Detroit. He said, it was the summer of 1990, and he went with a friend. We have like the Chabad Peace Corps. Young rabbis go out, visit small communities, and he went with a friend of his, Rabbi Mintz, to Fresno, California, in the small cities. Every year in Nashville, we also have young rabbis that are going to come this summer, visit Tullahoma and Cookville and small towns. There was a shliach there in Fresno. He brought down these two young rabbis. They were like training to be shluchim. And there was a local supporter of this Haman, and he said, why don't these young rabbis stay with me? I'll take care of them. And they became very close to him. Towards the end of their summer stint, there was a few-week mission. They told their new friend they're going to be going to Yosemite National Park. And this man was assuming that this was like the next mission, the next destination for these young rabbis and trainees. He said, if you're going to Yosemite, there aren't really any Jews living there. But you know what? There's a small town on the way to Yosemite. It's called Yosemite Park. There lived a Jewish lawyer there who I really know. He's an acquaintance of mine. And he really was not involved much in Jewish life. There's almost no people there. And he ran away from this little village. He really wanted to get away. He just didn't have any connection to God. He just wanted to run away from it all. So he went to a place where there's nobody, Yosemite Park. Now, the truth is, they're two young rabbis in training. We're not planning on visiting there because they were going to go to Yosemite National Park, see the tourists there, put on tefillin, give out mezuzot, interact with people. So as they were heading to their destination, they saw on the side of the road a sign with this little village, it was actually called Yosemite Lakes. So remember now. And they thought about it, and they said, what? We don't really know who to go to. We don't know where he lives. It's highly unlikely we'll find him. Let's just go straight to the park to meet the tourists. But they started feeling a little bad. Here, we're coming all the way from New York, as Merkah Shluchim, trying to find Jews in lost corners of the earth, and we're passing by a village, and we know there's someone there. At least let us go try find him. So they decided to turn back, and they went to Yosemite Lakes. What they found was actually a very remote, isolated town. Forests and mountains can be seen in every direction. There were almost no people there. They did notice on the side of the road a little real estate office. And they knocked on the door, and there was a man they encountered. They said, there's this Jewish guy, he's a lawyer, he lives here. Do you know him? And he said, yeah, I'll tell you exactly where to find him. These two young rabbis in training, they followed the directions to this lawyer's home, and they were happy to find him. He was living there in a remote place by himself with his wife. He opened the door, he said, hey, you look like Jewish rabbis. What are you doing here? After a short chat, he invited them in, and they had a cup of coffee, and conversation progressed. And it went on actually quite a few hours. He had a lot of questions, and these two young rabbis, after all, they were young, but they tried to answer everything as best as they can. And at one point, he began venting about he has a daughter. She went to Palo Alto for university, and she became close to the Chabad couple there, Rabbi Levin there, and she became religious, and she left. She just became a God-fearing woman, and I'm really upset, he said. This is not what I planned for my daughter. The visit went on for about 3 hours. He was so deeply engrossed in a conversation with these young rabbis on so many different topics, and he became very warm, he became very friendly. And he said, you know what, rabbis? You inspired me. Can you put up a mezuzah on my door? And they put up a mezuzah, they put up on tefillin with him. It was an amazing visit. And they left. They were trying to go from there to the park, but they saw there was a lot of traffic and they didn't know what's going on. They saw fire trucks and police cars, and everybody was leaving the park, and they found out that there was actually a forest fire in Yosemite. Park was closed, and all the tourists were forced to evacuate. Okay, they said, listen, we did our part, but we wanted to go to Yosemite, but we can't go there now. They were a little disappointed, but they said, you know what? At least we met this Jew and this lawyer, and we had a nice conversation. But they went back to their base in Fresno, and eventually, a short while later, they went back to the yeshiva. They finished their few-week stint of Merkah Shluchim, rabbis in training, roving rabbis, as we call them. Many months later, it was before Passover, they went back to New York, and there was a gathering of Hasidim, which is called a Farbrengen. People talk and they sit, and a rabbi got up to speak, and the rabbi actually was a Chabad rabbi from Pittsburgh. And he told the crowd about a fascinating story. He says, there's a woman in my community that actually became religious in California. Her father was a very wealthy lawyer, and he was very angry about the path that his daughter had chosen, because her parents completely detached themselves from her. Yet she would speak to the Chabad rabbi constantly, and sensing her great pain, the Chabad rabbi saw that she wants to learn more. He said, why don't you write to the Rebbe about it? You know, she grew in her Yiddishkeit, she became religious, but she was very torn. Her parents felt this way, and she felt the other way. One day she's sitting, and there was a knock on her door, and she was shocked. She opened the door, this woman, and she finds her parents there. She was overjoyed at this opportunity to reestablish this connection with her parents. But she says, Mom and Dad, what caused you to have such a change of mind to come visit me? I'm religious. You didn't want to have to do with me. And her father said, you know, let me tell you something. I was sitting at home one day, just relaxing. There was a knock at the door. Two young rabbis came in. I don't know where they came from. They had this most amazing conversation with me. I said, you know what? These religious Jews aren't so bad. And suddenly, I just felt I miss my daughter. I want to see my grandchildren, and that's why I'm here. Now you have to understand, as this shliach from Pittsburgh was concluded his story, I realized that this young woman, Rabbi Shem Tov said, was the daughter of the lawyer who we met in our trip in California. You know, we thought we randomly found him because we were going on a trip to Yosemite. Yet at that far bringing, at that gathering, we learned that it was the Rebbe in New York who sent us there to reunite with his daughter and answer her plea. So friends, today, I ask the Rebbe, let us all ask the Rebbe, to serve as our shliach, to beseech from the Almighty God, on behalf of us all, to finally bring this true, complete redemption now, and not to delay it even for a moment. Friend, this Gimel Tammuz, this Monday night and Tuesday, is the Rebbe's 30th anniversary of passing. It's a painful day. I remember the Rebbe. I grew up with him. The Rebbe gave me charity several times as a kid. The Rebbe interacted with me. The Rebbe saluted to me when he started to join the army, children of Hashem. We should all serve Hashem with like soldiers. The Rebbe had several interactions with me. The Rebbe gave me personally a mission to share good news with him. For years to come, he met me. He must have meant till the time of the coming of Mashiach. But the Rebbe lives on, just like Jacob lives on through his students, and Moshe Rabbeinu lives on, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi lives on. The Rebbe is here today, and he lives on through you. He lives on through me. And the Rebbe has tasked us with a mission. What was the last mission that Rebbe gave before his passing? That each one of us has the power to bring in an era of a redemption of Mashiach. It's going to be a time when the world will only know of goodness. All evil will be eradicated. All illness will be eradicated. There won't be any wars. They say, as Isaiah says, all swords will be used for plowshares. It'll be a world where you and I will say, we'll feel the sweetness. We'll see the open revelation of godliness. But it takes a little bit more to bring that era. Imagine the world was at a 50-50 scale. All the good and all the challenges were on that scale, and it was exactly. And your one deed, boom, can tip the scale to bring in that era. That's where we are today. So on this Tuesday, Gimel Tammuz, which begins Monday night, and on Tuesday day, which is the 3rd of Tammuz, is the 30th anniversary of the Rebbe's passing. As much as I miss the Rebbe, my heart aches, and my heart longs to be with the Rebbe. I know that the Rebbe lives on through you, and the Rebbe lives on through I, and you and I can fulfill the Rebbe's last will and testament to bring about a time and a world that will be an era of goodness, kindness, revelation of godliness, where there will be just, we're going to say, this is the moment we were waiting for. So I ask you, let us tip that scale. Make this Gimel Tammuz a meaningful day, a day when the Rebbe's neshama is shining more than any other day. Every year, more and more, his presence is felt as we see the light of God filling this world like never, ever before. I ask of you on this day, tip the scale, do your task, and may we merit that the scale tips, and we will be reunited with our Rebbe and all our loved ones with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. Amen.